Parshas Shmini. This week's Parsha begins. This is Perek Tes Pasuk Aleph. Psukim Aleph and Beis. We'll be discussing. That's chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. The Parsha begins, Vayhi Bayom HaShemini, and it was on the 8th day, and that is the 8th day of the dedication or the establishment of the Mishkan of the Tabernacle. Kara Moshe Aharon ulevanav. So Moshe called to Aaron, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and his sons, Ula Ziknei Yisrael, and to the elders of Israel. We'll need to ask why these people. So when we see that from the next verse, it says, Vayomer Aharon, and he, Moshe, said to Aharon, Kach lecha egel ben bakor lechatos va'ayel le'olot timimim va'krei lefnei Hashem. Take for yourself a calf from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and offer them before Hashem. And that's unusual because a chatos, especially a chatos of a kohen, is usually of a full-grown cow. So an egel is a young cow. And why is it that it's specifically an egel? In addition, why is it if Moshe is giving instructions to Aaron and his children, who are now becoming the Kohanim, they've been designated, now they're going to begin the service in the Beis HaMikdash. Why did Moshe call to the elders to be part of this conversation? So Rashi comments on this. And this is in the first verse. This is in Pasuk Aleph. And Rashi says, L'ziknei Yisrael, to the elders of Israel, Lahashmi she'al pi hadibur Aaron nichnasu m'shamesh b'kehuna gedola, so that they may hear, to inform them that it is through the direct instruction of the Almighty, that's called al pi hadibur, literally on the basis of the speech, and that's an allusion to, in rabbinic terminology, that's an allusion to a direct command of the Almighty, that Aaron is entering and is going to serve as the Kohen Gadol. V'lo yomru me'elav nichnasla, and so that they won't say that he entered of his own accord. So we have a need, evidently, to dispel what might be a false assumption that since, either because Moshe is the boss and he can install anybody he wants, so he's installing Aaron as the Kohen Gadol, so or because Aaron just decided on his own. That's the simple reading of Rashi, but others who read Rashi understand him to mean that there is a possible explanation of nepotism, that Moshe, who is, as I mentioned, the leader, the boss, is giving the nod to his brother. I think it was Mayor Daley of the original Mayor Daley of the city of Chicago, who, when he was criticized for handing out contracts to family and friends, his response was, well, if you can't give contracts to family and friends, who can you give them to? In a sense, there appears to have been a potential for suspicion that Moshe was the precursor to Chicago politics and was awarding the contract, if you will, this cushy position of Kohen Gadol to his older brother. And this comes to dispel that notion that he went in on his own, or that he went in as a plum patronage position afforded to him by his brother Moshe. So that's one potential rumor or suspicion that is that the Torah seeks to avoid by calling an official meeting of Aaron, his sons, and the representatives of Klal Yisrael, which are the Zikanim. Now we have another issue that we identified earlier, which is what's going on with this egel, young calf, when the standard korban chatas for a kohen is a full-grown cow. So Rashi here as well says lahodia, to make known, shemechaper lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu al-yedei egel zeh al ma'aseh ha'egel she'asa, to tell us that the Almighty is giving Aaron atonement through this calf for the calf that he made. The calf that he made is a reference, it's pretty obvious that it's a reference to the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, in which Aaron facilitated the making of that calf. Now, the Meforshim there explained that Aharon really didn't want to create an avodah zarah. He didn't want to create an object of foreign worship, but he thought he would co-opt the process by demanding jewelry, and he thought people would be reluctant, and he said tomorrow, and he thought that he could stall, and it didn't work out. He'd seen what had happened to Hur, and who had, according to tradition, had attempted to stop the mob, and they murdered him. Aharon did not want Klal Yisrael to engage in further depredation, and he attempted to co-opt the movement, and he failed. And so the Egel HaZahav emerged from the mixture in the flames, and it led to a disastrous consequence for the people of Israel. In fact, later on we see that from Rashi and others that Aharon was in fact reluctant to assume this position because he felt he was tainted. Now, he had been forgiven, as Klal Yisrael had been forgiven, and the proof is that God said, okay, here, start the Mishkan and build this, and we continue the relationship. So there is a need to communicate in a very demonstrative, open, obvious way that Aharon had been forgiven for his part, his role in the making of the Egel HaZahav, of the golden calf. And so, what better way than to use the very same type of animal that had been the object of sin, and to use that as an object to achieve atonement for Aharon. Now, what Rashi seems to be saying is that the Almighty is forgiving him when he brings this egel. This egel is what is the offering of this calf as a sacrifice, is what is granting or is effectuating the forgiveness for Aharon. We see from some of the Meforshei Rashi, the commentaries on Rashi, that what's going on actually is a removal of the egel from the banned means of accomplishing spiritual ends. There's a general rule: ein kategor nases anegor. The prosecutor cannot become a defender, or perhaps more accurately, the object that caused one to be rightfully accused cannot then be used to defend. And the Meforshei Rashi explain that first of all, the Gemara talks about it and says this is limited. This rule is limited, at least insofar as it applies to the Kohen and maybe to other objects of sanctity, to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to the Holy of Holies, in which when the Kohen HaGadol, when the high priest would serve, he would not wear his gold vestments, but rather his plain, simple uniform, because the gold was used in the service, in the making of the golden calf. And there the Gemara says, "Ein kategor nases anegor," the object that causes accusation cannot be used to defend, in other words, to achieve atonement. Why is that not applicable here? So the limitation of that principle to the Kodesh HaKadoshim is one aspect, is one possible way to view this. The other is to say that Aharon had already achieved atonement. He had achieved atonement without a korban. Now is the opportunity to put the icing on the cake, if you will, for the kapara, for the atonement, and to have a korban. And what better korban, once he was already forgiven, is to use that very object of sin and to use it for kapara. We also see that literally public relations is really important. We see that getting the message out in an accurate way to avoid misunderstandings is very important. Some people have the attitude that, well, if it's true, then it doesn't make a difference what people think. We are going to state the truth or act in accordance with the truth, and it doesn't make a difference what people think. I don't care what people think. We're just going to act properly and not worry about people thinking that we're acting improperly. We know that this is not a principle in the Torah, and the Torah makes, and certainly in the oral law, makes a big deal out of avoiding appearance of impropriety. There's the notion of maris ha'ayin, of doing things that could lead to an appearance of impropriety. We know that, for example, the Gemara also says that what was when Moshe, before Aharon started in the service for the first 7 days of the Mishkan was conducted by Moshe. What clothes did he wear? He wasn't a Kohen, so he didn't wear the Kohanic vestments. He didn't wear the big dekuna. What did he wear? So the Gemara says he wore a cholik lavan she'en lo imra. He wore a simple white tunic that had no hem. Why? So people shouldn't think that he's taking shkalim, he's taking coins from the mikdash and slipping them into the hem of his clothing. Moshe Rabbeinu. But people might say that. People say all kinds of things, of scurrilous things, and they impute all kinds of bad behaviors to people who are really not guilty of those behaviors. So you might say, okay, he's not guilty of the behavior, so what should he care about it? And we see from Chazal that it's important not only to act properly, but it's important that people understand that you're acting properly. There's a principle of v'hisem nikiyim, that you should be clean both in the eyes of God and also in the eyes of man. Preserving one's reputation is important. Now, it's important also to point out that it doesn't mean that one should act solely for the purpose of reputation and not for the essential moral value of the action. One should act principally for the essential moral value, but one should also be concerned that people not misconstrue one's actions and impute bad behavior, and that we have to take steps to make sure, or to help assure, that people don't view our actions improperly, but rather they understand that we are acting properly. Have a good chance.